My name is Hana Riaz.
And what do you do, Hana?
I am a writer and I'm the director of The Body Narratives.
So you're the founder of The Body Narratives. Could you tell us a little bit about why you founded it and what work you do?
So I originally founded The Body Narratives as a digital platform. I was really keen to make a space for women of colour all over the world to be able to curate and document their stories and their experiences, particularly around their bodies. And out of that developed sort of a kind of need to create a platform that also invests in their creative and personal development. So it's very much the focus of it is healing, reclaiming their stories, and using art as a tool to do so.
So what examples do you have of that?
Well, earlier this year in April, we actually launched our first exhibition. We hosted about 13 artists, some of whom we worked to commission, a team called I Shape Beauty, and they worked with about 7 girls, women of colour from London, to create visual pieces and poems that expressed and explored issues around shame, around identity, on healing, particularly centred on race and gender. And then as part of that, we also created a series of educational activities. So we worked with schools, we had an artist seminar where we brought on several artists to discuss their journeys, particularly as women of colour artists in different fields. And again, additional workshops that really had a focus on using art and art as a way to process and unearth their own stories.
So is the experience of women of colour, as you call it, different from that of other women?
By other women, what do we mean? I guess we mean white women specifically. That's the kind of association we have with that. The reason why I've created a platform that specifically focuses on women of colour is because there is a double bind. There is issues around race that shape gender and experiences of gender, as well as many other issues. So whether it's disability, whether it's class, whether it's mental health, so all kinds of different structures and systems that shape our experiences. So my interest was to create a safe platform and a creative platform for women of colour specifically to explore those things and how it affects them.
So you're saying women of colour, but who would constitute a woman of colour?
Well, women of colour is actually very much a political term, although it is focused on, how do we say, non-white women. So specifically women of African, Asian, South American, Aboriginal descent. It is also a political identity that kind of gives, sorry, that brings that to light, really, those kind of intersectional experiences.
Do you want to say that again, just because he said something, and I don't know if that might have been...
No, it's fine, this is very directional. Her voice will be the loudest.
Got a bit distracted there.
It's okay, let me have a look at that. So how does the Body Narratives differ from other organisations out there?
There's lots of organisations that, for example, do work in the arts and cultivate spaces, for example, personal and creative development that showcase and encourage young artists. But for us, there was a kind of need to address the underrepresentation of women of colour in the arts, or their ability to advance in their careers. And create a space that encourages young women to do that in particular. So we address that underrepresentation and provide a space to do that, the tools, resources, networks in particular.
So are you saying at the minute there are not very many other spaces for women of colour?
Yeah, I would. In terms of art spaces, there is limited development for them. There's limited career opportunities, limited also resources. So we're really about investing in women of colour and communities of colour through the arts.
And why is that?
What do you mean? Why is there not?
Why is there not enough spaces, first of all?
Why is there not enough spaces? Well, racial inequality is a big part, and race structures a lot of experiences, but also class. Majority.
Okay. Do you want to turn that down slightly?
A lot of communities of colour in this country are very much located in poorest wards, which also limits their experiences, their access to resources and those spaces. So there's very much that kind of relationship between who has access and how they have access to it. So we're about really challenging those barriers.
So how does art do that?
Culture. Culture is probably one of the most creative spaces. It allows us to imagine, it allows us to transform, it allows us to dream, and a lot of structural inequalities are maintained through culture. So ideas we have about race, about gender, about who can do what, why they can have that, where they should be, how they are located within different systems. And so for me, art is very much a space of transformation and imagination. So by encouraging young women of colour into the arts and using that as a way to reclaim their stories and their experiences, we feel that we are equipping them or making room for them to kind of challenge structures and hopefully bring about cultural change, particularly within this country.
So you're only looking at cultural change within the country, you're not looking at communal cultural change?
It's introspective. Definitely introspective as well, because structures and those systems are perpetuated within communities. So for example, whilst we use the term women of colour, there's a very big consciousness, for example, about how anti-blackness specifically operates within non-black communities to perpetuate these ideas about race and inequity and inequality, really. So it's about having a sort of nuanced understanding about how these structures and those systems work, and that can operate communally, and it also can equip those communities then to challenge and transform broader, say, British culture and society.
So in terms of what we could be considered mainstream feminism, where does this kind of feminism sit within it?
A lot of feminist work, activism in particular, that's also gone on to shape academic work, and those things are very much interlinked for women of colour as feminists. It was partly a response to their marginalisation within the mainstream feminist movement, which was dominated by middle-class, white, liberal women who weren't paying attention and weren't interested in sort of discussing race, discussing class, immigration, all those kinds of things that were very much a huge part of how women of colour's lives, you know, operated on a day-to-day basis. And so women of colour feminism, black feminism, and all those kinds of diasporic feminisms have really emerged as a response to colonialism, imperialism, and the kind of way that mainstream feminism still operates with those ideas in mind. But it was also an activist response to tend to their community. So it wasn't just a response to white supremacy and how the white feminist, you know, movement in terms of how we understand mainstream feminism. It's also about creating room for these women to do work and to celebrate one another and be human, fully human in that kind of space.
So do you feel though that, because often there's a charge by women of colour feminists that white, well, predominantly mainstream feminism doesn't seem to help them very much, and at times actually makes their lives more difficult because of their theories and structures and so on. Whereas in the early 20th century it was all feminism, particularly mainstream feminism, is tied in with colonialism, colonialist ideologies. Is that still a factor?
I would say that very much is. Very much is. And I think, for example, if you go into a lot of student feminist spaces, that notion where colonialism and imperialism is very much kind of tied to how it operates is still there. And I think that's why we do see, particularly in a city like London, so many exciting black and women of colour feminists organising, creating, and doing so in spaces that they feel they're able to really nurture and challenge things in a way that's, I guess, is not really addressed in other spaces.
So how do you identify yourself?
My identity changes according to context. On a personal level, I do see myself as a British South Asian Muslim woman. I come from a middle class background, which really shapes a lot of the experiences and the things I've had access to. I've, in particular moments, identified as politically black through different aspects of activism and organising. And I identify as a woman of colour feminist every day, all day. So that shapes according to where I am and what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. But you define yourself as politically black, but what does being politically black mean? I mean, as you said, you're of South Asian descent, and the common understanding of people who are black are people who are from Afro or Afro-Caribbean heritage.
Yeah. So the kind of where politically black has been relevant in some of the things that I've been doing and organising, where I have identified that. I remember when I was a co-black students officer, and that was a topic that came up quite often, whether we change the name, how we would change that, what would that mean. For me, the relevance was actually particularly in the context of the historical legacy of imperialism, colonialism in this country, about a particular solidarity that existed in terms of activism around racial inequalities between people of African and Asian descent. So that's where it's remained relevant for me, is also identifying that kind of experience that is very much framed by Britain and a kind of post-colonial diasporic reality. But that shifts and that changes at moments. So I do identify, have identified at moments with that.
But isn't that also problematic, because as you may know, the term politically black is very broad and vague, and each group has different challenges, and do you not feel that by having such an abstract concept such as politically black, you're not actually dealing with the other issues that affect only particular communities? Yeah,
I think that there is always the risk of that we see all the time. We see that also in the history of that activism as well, specifically as well around anti-blackness. I would say that operates, for example, in South Asian communities quite openly, which is one of the reasons why I kind of really want to work to challenge that. However, it also, particularly in relation to the feminist praxis that I have, it's not about overarching, like it's not about homogenizing those groups. That is a political identity and a political basis of organizing. However, in order to effectively organize, you have to make room for the nuances and the complexities, and also make room for example, people of African and Caribbean descent in particular to have the space, the room, the authority on things.
So how are you challenging these racial perceptions within the South Asian community?
So through the body narratives, we've done a number of pieces on that. I think one of the first pieces we actually launched when we launched the site was, and got a lot of circulation, was about, it's not just in the South Asian communities, in all communities of colour really, but that was specifically addressing that. How anti-blackness operates. It's about having honest conversations and putting that work in. One of the next projects I'd actually like to do is actually workshops, events on how we actually confront and we challenge that. So it starts off by being openly honest about that and trying to confront.
So you say anti-blackness, but what does that actually mean? What form? What kind of examples would take? Well, how does it take form? You know, what is anti-blackness within the South Asian community? What do they do that's
the same way it is within how we understand white supremacy. So it is discriminating and having prejudice against people of African descent. It goes beyond colonialism in the British, in the South Asian subcontinent. It has links to casteism, complexionism, the history of India, particularly in its north-south divide. When I say India, I mean the Indian subcontinent in particular.
Could you explain to us a little bit about what complexionism is and clanism is?
So the idea that if you're darker, you are less human. and that you should be discriminated on that basis. So it has, in the South Asian community, darker skin has an association with being poorer, being lower in terms of caste, and caste didn't just operate within Hinduism, it was very much kind of shaped and framed and structured a lot of all South Asian communities, really, whether they were Muslim, Sikh, even Christian. So it's those kinds of connotations, and that very much operates in the same way that white supremacy does around blackness and who's located where. So in South Asia, the fairer you are, the closer to whiteness you are, and the darker you are, the closer to blackness you are. So it still operates very vividly.
In terms of your definition of politically black, how do you apply that to the work that Body Narratives actually does?
It's an element of it. I mean, we identify as a women of colour organisation, partly also because we know that there is that discussion to be had on the relevance of politically black and how that fits in now, who that fits in with, and also confronting those kind of challenges and structures. But we do, for example, we have had and we do have contributors who consciously choose that term. We've worked with organisations that do. So it does frame it, I think, because the Body Narratives now is specifically looking to explore race and gender and the realities of women of colour in this country and their work and their experiences. Politically black will have some relevance because of tracing that historical legacy and trajectory of anti-racism work in this country. I don't know what I was saying is making sense.
That makes perfect sense. So it's Black History Month. What does the actual month mean to you?
To me personally, Black History Month is an opportunity to celebrate the work, the history, the culture of black communities all over the world. But it's also a really pertinent reminder of where we are currently in this country, the historical amnesia that occurs around black history, pre-colonialism, through colonialism and slavery, and also like diasporic history. So it's an opportunity to confront those things and celebrate those things. But it's also a really important reminder of where we are and what kind of work we have to do now going forward in remembering, I think.
So what is the Body Narratives doing to commemorate this month?
So we'll be on our digital platform, we'll be publishing some pieces around that. So contributors, our columnists, will have a focus on celebrating black women in history. We're collaborating and working with student unions and a couple of student unions across the country, running workshops that again celebrate the history of black women, but also encourage young women of colour to empower themselves through that.